Okay, Father, thanks for today. Thanks for life and breath and your protection and your provision. And thank you for my brothers and sisters there in Cape Town and for their desire to worship you, for their desire to make disciples and, be a faithful church there in that city. So thank you for them. I pray that our time together now would be helpful and encouraging and fruitful for the work you've called them to there. So please lead our discussion and make it useful for every person. So we love you and thank you and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay. Well, I don't know if everybody knows why we're on this call, but I'm going to let Gerard give a bit of an introduction as to the theme and why this theme is worth talking about. So now the pressure's on, Gerard. Can you please set us up, introduce?
Yeah, so we know I've not met Todd personally, but we know Todd through Paul Schoenfeld, who, as everybody else knows. Paul introduced us to Todd. Todd runs he's involved in the church ministry. I think you're in San Diego, right?
Yes.
I'm not sure if you head up Mission Made Simple, but
yes.
But I know that that's part of the Soma communities, which are a little bit of come out of gospel communities and what we've tried to implement at the church. So Todd is seasoned, him and his wife, I think Hannah, are seasoned in gospel communities and missional communities and thinking about how to reach and bless the city. And so today's training is about how to lead a healthy DNA. We've spoken about gospel communities as the heartbeat of our church, where we want to see and following Jesus, loving Jesus. Typically, we've spoken about our 5 identities of being disciples, of being worshipers, of being missionaries, of being family, of being servants, and we want to live those identities out in the gospel communities. But we all know, and I can see Sandilia's gospel community is quite big and it's made up of quite a few folk, and often that can be quite difficult to speak the gospel into each other's lives. And so Paul actually is the one who emphasized and pushed us towards having DNA groups, which is a little bit different to what Todd has written in that pamphlet, but we basically call it discipleship, nurture, and accountability, which is fairly similar. But essentially is we've wanted to encourage DNA groups, which are smaller gender-based groups, where we can really actually do that work of discipling, of nurturing, and holding each other accountability according to the gospel of Jesus. And because in a bigger group setting, it's one, not appropriate better in smaller groups to do. And wrestling with, as a church, how do we implement both? How do we and various gender-based groups, and how do we do the DNA together? Some groups have had some success with that. Some groups have tried, and I think we all see the value of it. And I guess this training is how can we do this better to encourage that actually we're discipling and following Jesus together as a church. And so essentially Todd is helping us on the Zoom call to think a little bit more about, how do we foster DNA groups in the church?
Okay, great. So your signal, Gerard, still seems to be lacking a little bit, but if you hear me cutting out, please let me know, okay? Don't let me talk. Don't let me talk and talk. Okay, everybody's good? Great.
Yeah.
Well, quick introduction. Yes, I live in San Diego, the southern part of the US by the Mexican border. I've got 5 children, and I'm part of a church here called New City. It's a church of gospel communities. So my wife and I help lead a gospel community. We also help facilitate, that's how we would say it, we help facilitate DNAs. I'll tell you a little bit about mine in a minute. My wife actually has her DNA tonight. with 2 other women. So we rotate every other week. The women go 1 week, the men go the next week, and our DNAs grow out of our gospel communities. So I'll be telling you more about that. So we do that here. Before that, we lived in Europe. And so I spent 11 years in Europe, in the Czech Republic and Romania. Very different context, obviously. And we did similar missional things living there. And so for the last 25 years, I've been working with churches around Europe, around the US, and South America, in South Africa. I was in South Africa 3 years ago. I was supposed to come back last year, but COVID killed that idea. Okay. But I was in Cape Town 3 years ago, meeting with some leaders and like-minded churches there, Cape Town, Pretoria, Johannesburg, Durban. So had a great trip. Very excited to see churches growing in their missionality. I'll say it like that. But I also meet regularly with South African leaders over Zoom like this. And so last week I was on with a group of leaders again from some of those cities. And so I've got regular contact with your context. So I know quite a bit from working every month with these South African leaders, these South African churches. So, but that's what I do with Missional Made Simple. It's training, it's coaching with churches that are trying to organize around different forms of gospel communities and DNA groups, trying to learn how to live more intentionally on mission at work and in their neighborhoods, to reach lost people in their cities. So that's what I spend my life. That's what I spend my life doing. So I'm excited to do it with you guys. Now. So I'm going to say a few things about DNAs, but we already know you guys talk about it a lot from what Gerard said. So I'm going to say a few things, but then I'm going to put it back on you to ask a bunch of questions. For this to be helpful, I think we need specific questions from your specific context. So I could give you examples from around the world. So just to encourage you, this DNA idea is being practiced and multiplied in many countries that I work in. Okay, so I can give you examples from Chile and Colombia and Mexico and in South America. I can give you examples from Australia, from Japan, from Northern Europe and Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. So this DNA idea is a good thing. It's a good thing. I believe it's a biblical thing, and it's a fruitful thing. So I just want to reinforce that I don't just think this is a good idea. I believe it's actually a biblical idea, and I believe it's really a timeless idea. It's not like it's not a new idea or a new method. Like it's timeless. I believe we can see it worked out throughout church history. If you study church history. And so, yeah. So that's what we want to talk about tonight for you is how do we organize these groups and help them function in fruitful ways? Okay. So I've got some good news and some bad news. Okay. The good news is, again, I believe if you'll commit to it, they will be very fruitful. Okay. The bad news is there's no cookie cutter. I can't give you a cookie cutter way to do it. There's no system that is going to guarantee it. And that's really connected to my first big idea. Okay. DNAs are not a program. It's not a program. It's not a structure. It's not a meeting. If your DNAs are going to be fruitful in helping people grow up in Christ, they must understand that it's a relational commitment. That's the big idea. DNA is a relational commitment between those people, 3 or 4 women, sometimes 5. I don't think it's ideal. 3 or 4 is better, or 3 or 4 men, but it's a relational commitment between those people to the flourishing of each other. That obviously can happen 1,000 different ways, right? In how that gets experienced. So relational commitment to the flourishing of each other. Flourishing of each other's marriages, flourishing of each other's parenting, flourishing of each other's sexuality, flourishing of each other's financial state, flourishing of each other's work vocation, flourishing of each other's physical, like I was talking with my DNA guys last week, and part of the discussion was around just healthy physical habits. Because one of the guys in my DNA admitted that not long ago he was about 80 pounds. I don't know how many kilos that is, okay? But that's a lot of kilos. He was 80 pounds overweight. Well, it affected everything in his life. It affected his job. It affected his marriage. It affected his parenting. It affected his joy and his well-being. So even in DNA, you're sometimes going to talk about physical habits, like what are good eating habits? What are good sleeping habits? What are good resting habits, Sabbathing habits? What are good habits about screen time? Like how much time are you spending on your phone and spending in front of your TV? So do you see that DNA is a holistic thing? It's not coming together and just having a formal discussion about the Bible and then going home, which unfortunately is how a lot of Christians have experienced small groups through the years, right? Kind of study the Bible formally, have a bit of application, then you go home. But not very holistic. And not much accountability built into it. To where you're saying, hey, you remember that thing we talked about 2 weeks ago? How's that going? Are you making better choices? Are you getting better sleep? Are you caring for your kids better? Are you caring for your wife better? How's that going? 2 weeks ago, you shared about this sexual struggle you had. Are you making better choices? How's that going? Are you creating better boundaries? How's that going? So in DNA, you're looping back around, checking in, reminding, encouraging. How are those things we talk about from week to week? How is that going? But I think part of the power of DNA is that you're in relationship with people that are connected to living life together in your gospel community. So you're seeing their life pretty often. You're seeing them in different circumstances. You're seeing them in different places. So you're seeing how they relate to other people. You're seeing how they're parenting or how they're speaking to friends or how they're speaking to their spouse. You're seeing it. So then it can be talked about further in your DNA if you see something that's a little off. So maybe you have a family meal night in your gospel community. And a couple shows up to your family meal night, and you can see that there's a bit of conflict. You can see that there's a little conflict between the husband and wife, or a little conflict between the parents and the children. Well, that night probably will not be the best time to address that. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But because there's more people, because there's men and women, might not be the best time to address that. But guess what? Next time you meet with your DNA, you should be asking about that. Like last time we had our family meal night or our game night, I could see something was a little bit off with your spouse. Can you tell us more about that? You guys doing okay? What was that about? How's that going? Or I saw you pulled your 5-year-old aside and you seemed really angry. You seemed really angry, seemed like you were kind of yelling at them. Like, what was going on there? So in your DNA, often you're going to work out some of the things you're observing in the other times of life. Because like Gerard said, the DNA space is unique. It's small, it's gender specific, and you have the opportunity to be open and vulnerable in ways that you cannot in other relational spaces. You get into a bigger group and it's a mixed group, many things you won't talk about. Show up at a Sunday morning service, even bigger group, more people. There's many things you're not going to talk about there. It's too big, it's too chaotic, it's too many people around. But in the DNA, it's a unique relational space for the most personal things to be talked about. And to be talked about on a regular basis. Okay? So just based on what I said there, any feedback, observations, questions? You don't have to. I just want to give you a chance.
Yeah, Todd, at what point in DNAs does one feel like they've maybe earned the right to speak into someone's life? So you say we have a gospel meeting, you see something happen, and when you have a DNA, you call it out. But at what point in the structure, in the consistency of this, would you say right now is about right to speak into someone's life?
Yeah, excellent question. And again, no clear answer. Sorry about that. Okay. Sometimes I've seen relationships open up like that very quickly. We're like, man, we've had some really deep conversations. And I can see, I can feel, I can hear there's an openness for me to speak into it, for me to speak the gospel into it, to remind them of their identity, to remind them of their sonship, their adopted sons and daughters, so they don't need to go to pornography, or they don't need to go to anger, or they don't need to go to anxiety. They can go to Jesus as the healer, as the provider for those things. So 2 months, 6 months, 9 months, different. Part of it is going to go back to how much time you're spending together outside of DNA. If you're only seeing each other a few times a month, that's not much, I'll be honest. Okay? In our gospel communities, we talk about them being family, being families. I actually was just on a call with a church right before this, and I love it. In their church, they call their groups, they call them missional families. Kind of a cool name. Connecting those big ideas of mission and family, so missional families. Okay? But we talk about that because Again, there should be a consistency of how much time you're spending together over the course of a month so that it feels like a pretty good family. Okay? So the more that's happening, obviously, the more trust you're going to have, the more friendship you're going to have, the more you're going to desire for that person to speak into your life. Because you're living a lot of life with them. You're helping each other live a lot of life. So with those kinds of people, you're going to want them to speak into your life usually because you trust them. Trust comes from quality time spent together. No shortcut to it. So if your gospel communities and your DNAs are only seeing each other and relating a few times a month, it's going to be very slow, honestly. But if your gospel communities are spending some more time together, seeing each other a couple times a week, 7, 8, 9 times over the course of a month, then things can go more quickly. Okay, so that's part of the answer to your question. Let me give you another really key thing. Okay, part of it is just going to be your willingness to be open with each other and how you understand deeper relationship. So last week, actually, last Wednesday night, I had a new man join my DNA. Okay, because of COVID, we've had some people move and we've had some adjustments with our gospel community. So we're readjusting right now. So we needed to readjust this men's DNA. So we had a new man join it. So this was the first time. This is the first time I've talked with him a little bit before at our Sunday morning gatherings, but this is the first time to really get to know his story some. And first time for the second person in our DNA. Okay, so we sat around a fire pit in my driveway. That's how we like to do DNA. Okay, build a nice fire, sit around the fire and talk for 2 hours. That's what we did last Wednesday night, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. in my driveway. But this was the first conversation with this guy, and it was amazing. Why was it amazing? What made it amazing? Well, I think what made it amazing was this expectation, and this is what I want everybody to hear, this expectation from the beginning that you're going to go deep into each other's stories. You're going to really get to know the life of those people. Well, how does that happen? How does that happen between women? How does that happen between men? Well, it requires the expectation at the beginning. We're going to go deep. We're going to go deep, guys. We're going to really get to know each other's lives, really get to know each other's stories. So it starts with an expectation. Then it starts with the practice of that. Okay. So again, that willingness for everybody to be open and vulnerable. But then it also requires a consistent rhythm of asking good questions. So this new guy came, he's actually never been in a DNA before. So he doesn't know what to expect. So we introduced the idea, me and this other man, we introduced the idea. Here's what the DNA is, here's the expectations, here's what we're going to do in the coming weeks, months, years. So then we said, okay, man, tell us a bit of your story. Where you grew up, what was that like? What was your relationship like with your parents, your siblings? What was that like? So he begins, and he shared some difficult details right away. He didn't have a father. His father left when he was a small child. No father. His mom was alcoholic. Very dysfunctional mother. So when he was 6 years old, he asked his alcoholic mother if he could go live with his grandmother because she was stable. So in the first 10 or 15 minutes of starting DNAing with this man, wow, we knew some of the difficult, broken parts of his story. So what did we do? We asked him some more questions. Can you tell us more about that? Tell us more about your mom. That sounds hard. You said she was alcoholic, so was she always drunk? How did that affect you as a child? And he told us, he shared some things, what that was like. Oh man, your grandma sounds amazing. Tell us about your grandma. She raised you from the time she was 6. Can you tell us about that? So he shared some about that. And then he shared some of what it was like with his grandmother as he became a teenager, and then as he became a university student, and then as he finished and got married. So he's telling us all these key moments in his life, all these key relationships in his life. He's giving us a picture into his life and ultimately into his heart. Because along the way, he's not just sharing technical details. There was some of that, but there was always some heart, emotion connected to it. Very powerful. This is the first night with him. And at the end of the night, so he shared a lot of his story, 30, 40 minutes. Then it was fun because he caught the idea and he asked me a few questions. And so I connected some of my story to his story. I said, you know what? I had a dad who was living in the home, but he was not a real dad. He was a distant dad. He didn't do anything that a dad should do. So I told him some of the difficult parts of my story, what it was like for me growing up without a dad, and who stepped in my life and became that dad influence. So he got to hear, and then the third man similarly shared a bit of that part of his story. So at the end of the 2 hours together, you can see that already, like, we know some important stuff. We know more than just who our favorite sports teams are and what our favorite foods are and where we like to go on vacation. Okay? We did talk a little bit about those things too. Okay? Some sports, some food, some family. We talked about those things, but then it went much further, it went much deeper. First night, first meeting, 2 hours, that's all it took. And now I already have this desire, I have this motivation to want to go deeper with this man. Because he already gave me important parts of his story. He already gave me some key parts of his heart. So next time we meet, guess what will happen? We'll be meeting again, next week, next Wednesday. I'll keep going in his story. Man, last time you told us this when you were in university, you had this key spiritual awakening. Can you say more about that? What happened during those university years? What experiences did you have? Who was involved? What people were important? What do you think led to that spiritual awakening? those are the kinds of questions we will ask. Because then when we get to know each other's stories with that kind of depth, with that kind of detail, then the Bible becomes real and active and transformative. Because now I can speak the gospel and the truth of the Bible into specific details of his life. So in the future, when he's struggling with this, when he's having doubts about this, when he needs to be reminded of this, I will be able to do that very specifically and very accurately because I know his story and because he knows my story. And Sandila, back to your point, he trusts me to speak into his life now. With this new man, not yet. With the second one I described, he and I have been in DNA now for like 3 years. We know a lot about each other. We've lived a lot of life together. I can encourage him with anything. I can challenge him with anything. Because he knows over time that I'm committed to his flourishing. Okay? So now that I've told you this story from last week and my DNA and these conversations and going deep into each other's stories, what thoughts, questions do you have? Hopefully you're already experiencing some of this, but can you imagine going even further, going even deeper in these kinds of relationship with those in your DNA? What do you think?
So in encouraging the sort of meeting up as often as possible, is that the DNA groups then subsets of what you guys call gospel communities. I know your larger group studies.
Yes.
Is that kind of how it works?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right. And so, but the larger groups, are those the missional communities?
Yes.
Okay.
We actually call ours gospel communities also. Okay. So
okay.
we use that same language.
Because somebody else wrote the document. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, cool.
No,
and I just want to, yeah.
So let me clarify a few things. Those are great questions, Miguel. And I'll just give you a picture of my current gospel community because it's pretty typical. It's pretty average, pretty normal. Okay. We've got 11 adults. Pretty normal. Okay. Could be 8, 10, 12. Right now we've got 11. In the past, we've had 13. We've had 9. We've been in that range. We currently have, I don't even know, 12 children. So I think it's 11 adults, 12 children. Okay. And then we've got another 8 to 10, probably 8 to 10 non-Christians that we live a lot of life with. That is what we call our mission focus. Okay. So we've got our 11 adults. Again, it could be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We've got our 12 children. That's a lot of children, actually. A lot of gospel communities might have 2 or 3, 4 or 5. Okay. Or none. We've got others that are young marrieds, others that are university students that have no children. Okay, that's possible. But then each of our gospel communities has what we call a mission focus, which are the 8, 10, 12 non-Christians that they are focused on together. They believe God has sent them to. They're on mission to. Okay? So then, Miguel, our DNAs, like you described so well, are a subset, subgroup from that gospel community. Because we have so many children, in the very beginning, we realized that babysitting and childcare was going to be a struggle. Lots of kids. What do we do? How do we do DNA undistracted? So we decided that the women would meet the first and third Wednesdays of every month. So the men, the dads, could be home being good dads, taking care of the kids, and the women's could be out together undistracted. No kids. So the women go the first and third Wednesdays, the men go the second and fourth Wednesdays. Women are home, being good moms, putting the kids down. So the men can be out together, undistracted. So we found that very helpful. But I've been in DNAs that met even more often than that, more than 2 times in a month, where they were actually trying to meet every week, or at least 3 times in a month. So I'd say you minimum, you need to meet 2 times in a month. If you only meet 1 time in a month, honestly, it's going to be hard to build trust. It's going to be hard to stay accountable. It's going to be hard to build on previous conversations because you can't even remember what you talked about a month ago. Does that make sense? So minimum 2 times in a month. If you can make it 3 times in a month, even better. So, okay, so that's a little picture of some of the relational dynamics. You were going to ask another question, Miguel?
Oh yeah, no. Just I noted that in that document, the guy emphasized the number of people in the DNA groups as being quite important, and it just struck me as kind of true because before COVID in our GC, we just used to meet up all the guys, like more than once a month, I'd say. But the thing is, there were like 6 of us, and it just didn't really work in the sense of like, you know, we would meet but we wouldn't get like anywhere into any real depth. I mean, not that it wasn't nice or whatever, but we kind of, but then, you know, like the other week I met up with Dane and Gerard, just the 2 of us. It was actually supposed to be about like church leadership stuff. But then, you know, we found it a lot easier to talk about kind of what was going on, you know, because also like when you're talking about how you're going to structure your Bible studies and that kind of thing, it kind of matters how you guys are doing individually as well. So, but because there were 3 of us, it worked very well. And just everyone got what do we have seen as well. Yeah.
Okay, I lost you there for a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I lost you there for a little bit, but I got most of what you were saying. Completely agree. The number of people makes a big difference. You guys know that naturally. I think you said it. Okay, there's a big difference between 3 or 4 people and 6 or 7 people.
Mike. So yeah.
Okay, are you guys hearing me? Okay.
Yeah, you've gone a bit spotty with the internet. But I don't know if that's just me.
Okay. How about now? You guys hear me okay? Did you say yes?
Yeah.
So Miguel, yes. The size, the relational dynamic matters. You go 6 or 7, even 5, less likely to be as vulnerable, less likely to be able to get as deep into relationship. So I think when you get bigger also, it's easy for people to hide. You get your quiet people, your introverts. And when there's 6 people there, It's easy to fill the time, and one or two people don't need to speak, or they speak very little, right? When you have 3 or 4, almost impossible to hide. Okay? You probably never thought of this, but a lot of churches I talk to, they say, okay, how do we train our people to talk with non-Christians? How do we train them to go to work, go to the park, walk their dog in their neighborhood, and talk with people with intentionality? Well, guess what? That is another effect or another fruit of good DNAs. When you learn to relate well with other Christians, when you learn to ask good questions, when you learn to be a good listener, when you learn to build on a person's story, guess what? You will do it all the time. So you'll actually relate better in your family. You'll relate better when you go to work. You'll relate better in your neighborhood. People will be stronger relationally because of how they're relating in their DNA. Does that make sense? Everybody shake your head. Okay, those that have your cameras on. So if you can relate like this in your DNA, you're going to go to work tomorrow differently. You're going to know how to ask good questions to that non-Christian coworker. You're going to know how to listen to their story better. You're going to know how to go deeper to find out where is their unbelief come from. Why are they far from God? Why are they far from the church? Why do they have doubts? Why do they not believe? What's the source? If we don't learn to relate like this with non-Christians, we will not be effective in introducing them to Jesus. I believe Jesus needs to be introduced in specific ways connected to a person's story, like good news. The gospel is meant to be good news, right? For it to be good news, it must be spoken into the bad news of their life. The pain, the fear, the anxiety, the doubt. For it to be good news, it must be spoken into the bad news, but we must know the bad news in their story. I told you in my DNA last week, I heard some of the bad news. No dad, alcoholic father. I heard some of the bad news in his story. Now I will return to that in the future. I will return to remind him that he has a good heavenly father. He had no earthly father. That's bad news. The good news is he has an eternal father that loves him, that cherishes him, that has adopted him. I will remind him of that in the future. That is speaking good news into the bad news of a person's story. So we do that in our DNAs with each other as Christians, and then we also go and do that with the lost world around us. So DNA serves its purpose internally in helping us grow up in Christ, but also trains us to be good missionaries. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
What other practical questions do you have about functioning as a good DNA?
Yeah, could I ask a question?
Yes.
You mentioned having 5 children, and you also talked about seeing your missional family 9-10 times a month. Could you speak about how those things both fit in? How how you raise a family with 5 children, and also see 9, 10 times a month your missional family?
Okay. Great question. Great question. I would say a big part of it is that our children is integrated. Our children are integrated into this life together with our gospel community. So we don't have our kids' activities. We do have some kids' activities that are just, my kids play a lot of sports. We actually play a lot of club football, soccer, proper football. Okay. So my kids are very active in sports. My wife is a volleyball coach. Okay. So we do soccer, volleyball. How do we do all that? 5 kids, sports, school, gospel community, DNA. You've gotta learn to integrate it, not compartmentalize it. So how do we do that? Well, we do with our gospel community what we call family meal nights. So on Sunday evenings, we will bring our gospel community together, including our kids, and they're just part of the experience. And then we spend a lot of time at the park, honestly. We spend a lot of time at the park with our gospel community. And some of that time at the park playing sports, throwing a frisbee, playing volleyball, kicking a soccer ball. Many times we invite non-Christians into that also. Kids are involved. Non-Christians are involved. Families are involved. Everybody's involved. Well, who doesn't like going to the park? Does that feel like, oh man, we need more of that in our schedule? Like, that sounds great. We get to go to the park and we get to play sports and we get to throw parties and meals. And so over the course of a month, we've got some of these things scheduled into our life. But they're good relational things. They're not like, oh, we've got to have another party. So if you're doing things as a gospel community that aren't natural, that's a problem. Meals, parties, sports, that's natural for our gospel community. Everybody likes it. Everybody wants more of it. You can't do too much of it. Okay?
And
Meals,
do you live
parties,
relatively close together?
sorry again.
Do you live relatively close together?
Yes. Good point. So
Is
we live in a big city. San Diego's 2 million people. But our gospel communities are organized with proximity, usually. So even though we're in a big city, my gospel community is 10 to 12 minutes driving from each other. No problem to organize something at the park, nor no problem to organize something around that 15-minute area in our city. But great question. If your gospel communities, if people are living 20, 25, 30, 35 minutes from each other, very difficult to be good family. Very difficult to have this kind of consistency. Because part of what we do, we build some of this into our schedule, like formally, like our family meal nights. 2 Sunday nights every month, family meal nights with our gospel community. It's locked in, okay? But there's other things we do spontaneously because we can, because we only live 10 or 12 minutes driving from each other. So it could be Thursday night. My wife and I are like, you know what? Why do we have everybody come to the park on Saturday afternoon? No problem. 2 days later. And it doesn't mean everybody's going to come. That's not realistic. So sometimes we'll organize something at the park and half of our gospel community will be there. Still good, still fruitful. So be careful, because I've seen gospel communities feel like if everybody can't be there, we won't do it. Or if most everybody can't be there, we won't do it. We'll wait 2 more weeks. You can't function like that. You've got to plan stuff and go for it. And if 4 or 5 people come, beautiful. 7 or 8 people come, beautiful. So sorry, there's a question or two there.
I have a,
Go ahead.
yes, I have a question on that about sort of the number of people coming. How would you advise we handle it, or how do we navigate the situation where you have a few people who are regular, maybe 2 people who are regular, and then others who for various life circumstances don't come as often? How do you deal with that natural flux? And also then with when new people come into the area, how do you manage that well when you want to keep your group sizes also consistent? That's something I'm just wondering about.
And also, if I can add to that question, how do you make sure that you can build the trust if you have that flux, and including new people or people who aren't regular?
Good. Excellent. Very normal questions. Very normal relational dynamics. Part of it, I like your question. You have to be okay with that reality. What you described is not a bad thing. It's a normal thing. So you got to learn to live with it. Because discipleship is a journey. Discipleship is a process. Mission is a journey. Mission is a process. Sometimes you'll have more consistency. Sometimes somebody gets sick, or they change jobs, or they have a new baby, or something comes and you don't see them as much for a season, right? Part of the journey. So the posture you need to take is to say, whether we have 4 people tonight or everybody comes, we're going to maximize this experience relationally. My wife and I, we like to host, we do a lot of meals, we do a lot of parties at our home, okay? Sometimes we've invited like 5 families. We'll invite like 2 Christian families, 2 non-Christian families, 4 or 5 families. We'll invite 4, 5, 6, and 1 or 2 of them come. It's not what we expected. But we say, that's okay. We're going to maximize tonight. We're going to go deep in the stories, and we're going to have a lot of fun and a lot of good food with whoever comes. Whether it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, doesn't matter the number. We're going to maximize the experience. We're going to go, again, deep in each other's stories. Some of our best, most fruitful experiences have happened because most of the people didn't show up. We've had experiences where we invited 4 couples and 1 came. Guess what happened? We had an amazing meal, an amazing experience with that one family. And it was just what they needed that night. I can remember a time when this happened. It was a young, newly married couple. If 2 or 3 other couples would have come, they probably wouldn't have asked us some vulnerable questions. But those 2 or 3 other couples didn't come. So guess what happened? They're like, man, we're newly married. We've been married 6 months. It's a little rocky. This marriage thing. It's a little hard. And so they were open, they were vulnerable. They said, man, what do you do in these situations? We don't know. He wants to wake up early in the morning. I like to sleep in. I like to go to bed late at night. He likes to go to bed early. He likes to eat at 6 p.m. I don't like eating at 6 p.m. He likes Mexican food. I hate Mexican food. What do you do? What do you do? How do you manage that? How do you navigate that? So we had a beautiful conversation with them that night. It was exactly what they needed in their journey. So it doesn't matter how many come, you organize it, you go ahead, you maximize it, and you realize that this is part of everybody's journey. And you and your husband will be better for the journey. It's not just about them and who's coming, it's for us too. Every time we talk about our lives, every time we talk about Jesus, every time we open up our stories, we grow. Be careful to think that it's always about them and what they need. You all need it. I need it. Every meal, every party, every conversation, every DNA, every story, I need it too. I need to be reminded. I need to be encouraged. I need to be convicted. I need it. You need it. We need it. Great questions. Keep them coming. Got a few more? Gerard, tell me when you want to end. I can keep going for as long as you want to.
I think we can do 10 more and then wrap up. I did have a question about the word. So where does that feature in your DNA?
Okay, the Bible and biblical truth.
Yeah.
Obviously, centerpiece. Okay, we're not just talking about.
Did you get
Yeah,
that?
sorry, G, are you saying 10 minutes, hours, 10 more seconds?
We want to end the meeting in 10 minutes.
Okay, good. 10 more what? 10 more minutes. Everybody hearing me okay?
Todd, are you still there? Yeah.
Yes. Are you still there?
Yes, yes.
Everybody else, shake your head, show me you're alive. Good, okay. Zoom didn't like us for the moment, okay? What about the Bible? What about the Word? Okay, what about gospel truth? Yes, lots of that. Okay, it must obviously be the centerpiece, the foundation, where all of this story stuff, all of this life stuff we're talking about is centered on Jesus. So it's not just hanging out telling stories. It's hanging out, connecting life to Jesus, connecting life to our identity, connecting life to our calling, connecting life to Jesus' teaching. Oh man, that problem you're having with your boss, that conflict with your coworker, Jesus say anything about that? What's the Bible say? How should we respond in those moments? So yes, we are speaking biblical truth into all of this. But this is a shift for a lot of Christians. One of the things the New Testament tells us is to be doers of the word, not just knowers or studiers of the word. That's a big problem with a lot of Christians, a lot of churches. They think the goal is the study. That's the goal. It's not the study. Being faithful, being obedient to the word is the goal. So we obviously need it. We need to study it together. We need to talk about it together. So yes, we do that in different ways at different times. But the DNA is really trying to push us towards being doers, being obedient to the word. Even asking that question, what are you learning? What have you learned this week, this month, from your personal devotions, from your personal reading of the word? So what are you learning, guys? How's that affecting your life? How's it affecting your relationships? How's that affecting your decisions? How's that affecting your conversations? So again, there's lots of ways to get the word out there in the middle of the conversation. You know, you could do a book study, you could do a topical study, you could choose your favorite curriculum. I don't care how you deliver it. What I'm most concerned about is us then taking that information, those details, and pushing it into each other's hearts. So then it works out in daily life. That's the challenge most Christians have. The challenge is not actually getting enough biblical information in the middle of the relationship. Again, do a book study, do a topical study, read a few verses. Say, how about if we just read and discuss these 2 verses tonight? To talk about loving our neighbors. What do you think that means when Jesus said that? What do you think that means when you go to work tomorrow? What do you think that means when you drop your kids off at school this week? What do you think that loving your neighbor teaching that Jesus did, what do you think that means for this week? So you see, there's lots of ways to get the biblical information out there. So do that for sure, get it out there. Choose a book, choose a topic, choose a curriculum. Lots of good stuff out there. But then I'm most concerned with how you engage it after you get it out there. That's where it's got to connect to our hearts. That's where it's got to connect to our stories. That's where we've got to get into the specifics. How does that teaching affect my marriage? How does it affect my parenting? How does it affect my sexuality? How does it affect my finances? How does it affect when I go to work tomorrow?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I don't know if there's time for one more question, and then I think we should call it there to respect everybody's time. Andreas,
I have a question. Oh yeah, cool. I didn't know if you will see that. Hi Todd, my name is Andres.
Yeah.
And here's my wife Annika. Thank you for the meeting. I was just thinking about, in terms of implementing this program to be run through the church, in the sense of how do you start the DNA groups? We were part of a church that attempt to have a DNA groups idea or plan, where the pastor made the groups according to his own criteria, and soon later it failed. The groups didn't click. They were completely far from one another in terms of geography. So how do you implement basically from scratch the whole idea of DNA groups in the church?
Good. Yeah, so again, they're going to grow naturally out of your gospel communities. The pastor is not going to micromanage, or he's not going to organize these, okay? So you're in a gospel community. and you look at how many men you have, how many women you have, and you organize DNAs accordingly. So maybe you have 6 women and 4 men in one gospel community. It's like, okay, let's try to establish 2 women's DNAs and one men's DNA. So we'll have 4 men in the men's DNA, and we'll have 2 women's DNAs with 3 women and 3 women. But like we said earlier, you want the DNA relationship to be integrated, complementary with the gospel community relationships. Not a separate thing. That's not good, because then you can hide. We don't want people hiding. If you're living life with this gospel community here, and then you go somewhere else to do DNA-like things, it's like, but they don't know me. They can't watch my life. They can't see how I relate at the meal or the party or with my kids. They can't see that. Exactly. So at the center of every gospel community should be a few, I recommend minimum of 4 leaders that are leading the gospel community together. Whoever's at the core of every gospel community should talk together, pray together, determine what the DNA should look like. That should be determined by those leading the gospel communities, not somebody out there, not somebody at the top. Okay? That should be determined by those leading the gospel community, because they know their people. They know their people. They know who is going to be, should be in good relationship with each other. They determine it. They're responsible for it. That's the whole point of organizing our churches like this, is to decentralize the responsibility, decentralize the discipleship, decentralize the mission. That's where we get better fruit. Not having 1 or 2 people control it or dictate it from the top. Whoever is at the top of the church, I'm assuming that's Gerard and a few others, okay? They are the cheerleaders. I tell pastors, your primary job is to be a good cheerleader and a good coach. Not to control, not to dictate, not to micromanage. It's not necessary. You have all of these functioning adults. I assume you're functioning. You have a church full of functioning adults that are capable, highly capable of leading these gospel communities together in a fruitful way. They don't need a dictator. They don't need a control freak. Okay, micromanaging them. That's actually how we raise up more leaders, is by not doing that. We raise up more leaders by letting them lead. Letting them lead what? Leading gospel communities and DNAs. That's, from my perspective, the primary biblical work of leadership. If you were to say, what is a leader? Somebody who's caring for a gospel community that is trying to live like a family and be intentional on mission. So, okay. Hey, excellent discussion. Good news is this is only part 1. There will be a part 2, okay, later in the month. Think about these things, pray about these things, discuss these things in the meantime. Come back with more questions, and we will fill in more of the gaps, okay? And we will really focus on this idea of How do you be intentional in conversation? From my experience, and I work with churches all over the world, many Christians struggle with this. That's why we're going to talk about it. Okay? Christians struggle with it together amongst themselves, and they really struggle with non-Christians. But the conversation next time, I believe, will help you have better DNAs and therefore also be more effective on mission with lost people. I think it'll get us, yeah, to a stronger place. So hopefully you can make it next time. Looks like that is May 26th on a Thursday evening.
Yeah.
Is that right, Gerard?
Yes, yeah, that's right, Todd. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for logging in. I'll post a summary on the GC leaders group, and guys can give some feedback on there as well. But yeah, Todd, thanks a lot for taking the time to help us think about these things, stuff that we've been talking about, and trying to implement. So thank you.
Actually, that would help me before next time, is if you would send Gerard or send me, feel free to email me, but basically put together a list of further questions, or can you say more about that idea? If you give me some of those things, that's how I will begin our next call. So can you do that for me?
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Cool.
Okay. See you again in about 3 weeks.
Sure. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Night, night.